Hello, class. Good day. Praise be Jesus and Mary, now and forever. So for this session, we will be continuing with our discussion about the different periods of the Philippine literature. But before we proceed with the next period, which is the colonial period, since we're done with the pre-colonial period, let us have a quick recap first. So we started with our discussion on lesson 1. Now for lesson 1, we talked about or discussed about what literature is. Now, what is literature? Again, literature is any work of art that is a group of works of art that is expressed through words. Now, there are two major forms of literature, and those are both starts with P, prose and poetry. Very good. Now, let's start with prose. Prose is sometimes called also as free writing. Now, there are two types of prose, and these are very good. Fiction and nonfiction. How about for poetry? Poetry has three types as well, and these are very good. Narrative, dramatic, and lyrical poetry. Now, let us proceed with the discussion we had the last week, and that was about, this week, and that's about the pre-colonial period. We're talking about the period before we were colonized by the foreign countries or the colonizers. And who are these foreign countries? Spanish, Spain, America, and the Japanese. Americans and the Japanese. Very good. Now, we talked about the different forms of literary pieces that were formed prior to being colonized by these foreign countries. What are these literary pieces or forms of literary traditions before we were colonized? Think of at least like 5. Okay, I hope you still remember our activity, the activities we had last week, and the examples we have discussed. We even sang songs. So those are the examples of literary pieces that were formed or that were prevalent prior to being colonized. What was life before we were colonized? What were how did the Filipinos express their emotions, their daily lives, their environment, the nature? That's how expression was or communication was back then in the pre-colonial period. Now, let us move on to what period? After pre-colonial, that is the colonial period. So, let me share my screen. Now let's move on to the colonial period. I want you to read this. Start with an emphasis. Go. Okay, so when we're talking about colonial period, this is the time when the country was under foreign rule. So what do you think are these countries again? What are these foreign countries that colonized us during the colonial period? These are very good. Spain, America, and Japan. So during the colonial period in the Philippines, there was a strong emphasis on, based on the definition read, emphasis on morality and religion in various literary forms. So the works such as, let me share it, there you have it, Sináculo, Pasión, and Corrido reflected the prevailing influence of Catholicism and the moral teachings of the Spanish colonial authorities. So as what you can see based on the picture, I hope you can see it clearly. So that is an example of what? Cenáculo, exactly. So again, when it comes to Spanish colonization, what was their major influence or contribution to us Filipinos here in the Philippines? And that is Catholicism. Now, by the way, what is Cenáculo and Pasión? Based on the definition you have read in the PowerPoint. So if both of them talks about the life of Jesus, what is it? How are they different? Now, Pasión is a poetic narrative that is typically chanted or sung. So therefore, what type of poetry is this? It's lyrical poetry. Very good. Which recounts the life of Jesus. So this poetic narrative is mainly about or talks about the life of Jesus, while Cenaculo is a dramatic reenactment of the Passion story or the Passion story. So this is the reenacted poetry or dramatic reenactment of the Passion poetic narrative. Now, therefore, what type of poetry is Cenaculo then? That is dramatic poetry. Very good. So, Passion is usually performed as a live play or street theater. So, I hope you are familiar as well with street theater. So, what comes into your mind when you hear street theater? Street. So, I believe you have witnessed street theater. May it be live on the streets, during festivals, to Davao, or whatever that is, or maybe on social media. And I also hope that you're familiar as well with procession. So sinakulo could somehow be in that way of acting. Katong mga magdala og krus, based on the picture here in the PowerPoint, you can see itong gilansang sa krus. So sometimes in the Philippines, katong naga-procession sa streets alongside with a man acting as Christ, Jesus Christ, carrying the cross, are those people na nagpenitensya, di ba? Sa kung ano yung mga magpenitensya katong, they hit themselves, yung magdugo-dugo na nilang likod. So when we say penitential or penance, they hit themselves, admitting their sins and submitting themselves for their sins. So let me charge my laptop. So again, going back, passion or passion is like a narrative poetry, and Cenaculo is a play or a play version of Passion, and both forms are deeply rooted in the Filipino religious and cultural practices, especially during Lenten season in preparation for Easter Sunday. Okay. What is it about the Spanish colonization? What happened there? So, story time, just a refresher. So, a long time ago, the Philippines was not a free country. We all know that. It was controlled by Spain. And the people in the Philippines did not like how the Spanish rulers were treating them. They were not allowed to do many things, and life was not fair. So some people like Jose Rizal started writing stories to tell everyone about the problems. So he wrote about how the rulers were unfair and how the Filipino people wanted to be free. So one of these stories was called, one of the stories, famous literature or written works of Jose Rizal. We have two. What are those? Very good. No Limitangere and El Filibusterismo. Now, these stories were like messages that said Filipinos wanted to be free and they want things to be fair. So the message was mostly revolving on that. And many people read these stories and they felt the same way. So the stories made the Filipinos think about their own identity and how they wanted to be in charge of their own country. So because of these stories and the feelings that they created, they formed eventually because of the treatment. Filipino people decided that they did not want to be ruled by Spain anymore. They wanted to be independent and make their own rules. So this led to a big fight called the Philippine Revolution, where Filipinos fought for their freedom. By the way, how is revolution different from reform? So what would come into your mind if you hear the word revolt or revolution? Who is that person that comes first in your mind? That would be Andres Bonifacio. He fought to revolt for a revolution, violence, armed resistance, karahasan. But for reformation, on the contrary, it is for peaceful advocacy. And who would be the person behind that advocacy? That would be Jose Rizal. No armed forces, instead, peaceful advocacy for legal changes. So that's for reform and revolt. Revolt, violence, reform, peaceful advocacy. So going back, so Filipino people revolted because they did not like, again, how they were treated by the Spanish rulers. And they wanted to be free and in charge of their own country. So the stories written by Jose Rizal help them realize and inspire them to stand up for their rights. So that's the power of literature. That's how literature helped people in the past. That's how they communicated. That's how they were informed through reading. So let's move on to the next period. What do you think is the next period? That is, after Spanish, the, of course, we have the revolutionary period, as mentioned earlier, the revolt. Why people revolted. So literary paved the way to develop sense of nationalism among Filipinos. So because of those written works by Jose Rizal, it paved the way to develop a sense of nationalism. So Filipinos started to write about oppression, corruption, and other social ills, as in the works of Dr. Jose Rizal entitled No Limitangere and its sequel El Filibusterismo. I hope you're reading that. So next to Spanish period, we have the American period. So what happened during this time? American period. So another story time. So long time ago, around what year? There's no year. So a long, long time ago, Philippines was colonized or somehow visited by these so-called Americans. So they stayed for a while. And during that time, they brought some changes and taught us many things, good things. So one of the important things that they shared with us was, what do you think? Starts with E, it has D and ION at the end. That is education. Very good. So they came here and brought with us education. So, ma'am, how about these Spanish colonizers? Was there education for Filipinos? What do you think is the answer? That is, yes. So the Spaniards actually also played a role in providing education in the Philippines during their colonial rule. Sorry. But however, the Spanish colonial government established schools primarily to educate the children of the elite or the ruling class. So it's limited. So that means it's not accessible for all. It's not for everyone. It's only for those in the higher ups. When we talk about elite or the ruling class, so they're still social class. So those people or the elite group, we this refers to the Spanish mestizos. When we say Spanish mestizos back then, these are the people that has mga Spanish nga lahi and mixed with Filipino, mga Spanish Filipino. Ano. And then encomenderos, businesses, ilustrados, those educated ng mga Filipinos, naka-study sila sa Europe. So these schools were initially intended to teach Spanish language, culture, and as well as to Filipinolas. That is Catholic doctrines. So naadjud kahapon ang Catholicism and everything that they do. So again, going back, let's go back to Americans. They introduced free public education, which meant that everyone, if we were there, that would include us, you and me, we could go to school and learn. This was a big deal because it allowed Filipinos to read and write because of this free education, free public education. Filipinos were able to read and write, opening up a whole new world of knowledge. So, excuse me. So now that we have the ability to read and write, the people back then started creating or writing stories. So the most popular type of story that was a short story. So I know you have read so many short stories, and people wrote mainly about their experiences, their dreams, and sometimes even about mga make-believe places. So eventually, as Filipinos learned how to speak and write in English, our stories started to travel far, far away. So one person who became really famous was Jose Garcia Villa. Are you familiar with him? So again, Jose Garcia Villa, he was so good with words that he earned the title Poet of the Century. So not just in the Philippines, but around the world, worldwide, because he used the English language or medium. So it's not, oh, we are not limited to national lang ang scope, but we became worldwide. It became worldwide because of the influence of the Americans. They taught us how to write and speak in English. So that's how the Americans influence us. Now, ma'am, what are the famous literary pieces written during that time? I hope you are familiar with this, and if not, I hope you will remember this somehow, familiarize. Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez, The Small Key by Paz La Torrena, The Social Cancer as part of No Limitangere by Jose Rizal. So, we are done with the American period. Let's now move on to the Japanese period. Please read the PowerPoint silently. Okay, so let's now have another story time about the Japanese occupation. So this happened during the time called the World War II. Now these people, these Japanese people, stayed for a bit. And when they did, they had some rules about what people could write and talk about. So during this time, Filipino writers in the Philippines couldn't really write anything against the government. It was like having rules as to about what stories to write and what words you could use. So only those who went away, mga makagawas, like going on a long journey, had a chance to write freely. So, but you know what's good about this challenge is that even though there were rules, a Filipino writer still found a way to keep telling stories. So still, they started using their own language, vernaculars, native language like the Tagalog and other Filipino languages. So the nationalism is still there. So they use that to write. So imagine the passion, the deep passion they had before to express themselves, to use what's ours, and to communicate with everyone else. So they were really passionate about writing. That's very interesting. Now, it was like they found a way, they really made way or paved the way to share their feelings and thoughts without breaking the rules. So even in a time when some things were a bit hard, Filipino writers were still brave. So they wrote stories in their own languages and kept storytelling spirit alive. So I hope that would be how you would, I don't know, see writing as. So next to the Japanese period, what do you think? Excuse me. The post-colonial period. When we say post-colonial period, we are talking about the period after colonization. So freedom is there now. Everyone, please read the PowerPoint. Okay, so post-colonial period, after colonization, no more colonizers. After the challenging time with the Japanese people, Americans, Spanish, Philippines went through a period of rebirth. So parang they somehow had a restart, like a new beginning. So this time, people had their freedom back. They were ready to build their own future. So, but as years went by, there was a period that many remember as both unforgettable. Up until now, it's still controversial. And it was when the President Marcos declared martial law. So during this time, the government had more control, and there were rules about what people could say and do. Some found it difficult, some and others were not happy about how things were, but some also were fine with it. So, nilaladutan ninyo thoughts or opinions about an issue. So as time passed by, Philippines went through changes when it comes to expression. These changes would also talk about the behavior, the mentality of Filipinos, how resilient we are, how we react to issues, to mga seizures and everything. So the country continued to grow and develop, and today Filipinos still tell stories through literature, music, art, shaping the vibrant culture that makes Philippines a unique and resilient nation, and you are a part of that creation. So I hope that whatever you are passionate about right now, I hope that you will continue with doing what you like, what you love, and continue making this our country vibrant. So if you are into writing, you could start writing. And if you're into reading, you utilize the books available, appreciate the um, thoughts or the inputs of other people, read books. And if you are into music, you create music, you sing songs, and then post it online and then start sharing it with people worldwide. And who knows where things will get you. So that would be all for our discussion. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon. So to see or to check if you are really listening, please take a screenshot of this. Wait, listening, screenshot this. Send it to me. Bye bye. Thank you so much. See you on maybe next week, and then good luck on your performance test. One announcement is that I will be extending the deadline.